Hey, it's Professor Gould, and in this next section, we are going to talk about the molecule that is most important for life on Earth, and that is water. Good old-fashioned H2O. And the thing that makes water cool is hydrogen bonds. So hydrogen bonds are these weak attractions. They're not really chemical bonds, they're just sort of an attraction between water molecules. So here's a water molecule, remember, one oxygen, two hydrogens. The bonds between each oxygen and hydrogen is a covalent bond. Okay, so they're sharing their electrons. But look at how much bigger the oxygen is than the hydrogen. The hydrogens are tiny little things. So even though they're sharing, the oxygen is getting a little more of the electron than the hydrogen is. And that means that the electrons are giving one end, the oxygen end of the molecule, a little more negative charge, and the hydrogen end of the molecule gets a little less negative charge. Now, for those of you who are wondering, what if the water changes shape? It doesn't. It always has this angled shape. Okay, so the water molecule is always shaped like this because of the location of the electrons in the oxygen's outer shell. So the oxygen has more attraction for the electrons. So one end has a negative charge, the other has a positive charge. We say that it has a negative pole and a positive pole, and so we call it a polar molecule. Because water is a polar molecule, it is also going to be able to attract other molecules or other atoms that have a charge. So ionic things and other polar molecules are going to be very attracted to water and are going to dissolve in water. And that's what happens to salt, sodium chloride, when you put it in water. I'll come back to that in just a minute. Now, the reason that water and oil don't mix is because oil is non-polar. Okay, so polar dissolves polar, non-polar dissolves non-polar. So if you want something to dissolve in oil, it needs to be oil-based. So here's a polar bear, and it says, "Help, help, I'm dissolving." And the brown bear says, "But bears are insoluble." And the polar bear says, "That's easy for you to say, you're not polar." Get it? Because polar things dissolve in water. Get it? Polar bear. Okay, I thought it was funny. All right, so hydrogen bonds are the bonds, these little attractions between the hydrogen of one water molecule and the oxygen of another water molecule. So this little attraction here is the hydrogen bond. And each hydrogen bond is very, very weak because these atoms, these molecules, are not actually going to give up their electrons. Remember, they've got covalent bonds, really strong covalent bonds here. So they're not going to give up that electron. But the attraction between the water molecules, even though each of those hydrogen bonds is weak, you see that one water molecule can have weak hydrogen bonds to several other water molecules. And in turn, these can have hydrogen bonds to several other water molecules. And so, altogether, those hydrogen bonds are very, very strong, which means that water molecules stick together. And that gives water its most important property, which is cohesion. Cohesion is the tendency of molecules of the same kind to stick together. And cohesion is responsible for plants growing. Okay, this is the coolest thing in the world. So all plants, including this giant tree shown here, make these little tubes inside themselves. And those tubes are filled with water and other things dissolved in the water, like sugars. Sugar is a polar molecule. Ions, such as salt, but also minerals and things to make proteins. Okay, all of those things are dissolved in this water. And when there are little holes in the leaves of this tree, and when those holes open, some of the water evaporates from those leaves. When one of those water molecules evaporates, it is going to pull with it other water molecules. And so the evaporation of water from the leaves pulls water all the way up through the tree from the ground simply because of cohesion, because the water molecules stick together because of those hydrogen bonds between the water molecules. How cool is that? I think that's amazing. Hydrogen bonds also create surface tension. So surface tension is the ability of the surface of water to resist being broken. And this makes it possible for small, light things to float in water. So this is actually an insect, and this is the reflection of the insect. And the insect can spread out its weight across the water in such a way that it doesn't fall through, because the surface tension is greater than the pressure of the insect on that surface tension. Now this is a lizard that is, yes, in fact, walking on water because it spreads out its surface area and it runs really fast. And just as it breaks through the surface of the water, it lifts up its foot and creates, oh, it just cracks me up every time. This is called the Jesus lizard. I'm not making that up because it walks on water. Get it? Okay. All right. Now, the other cool thing about water is that when water is liquid, it can actually make more hydrogen bonds than it can when it's solid. Now, think of it this way. In liquid, the water molecules are all moving around, okay? Moving around, moving around, moving around. And all atoms are always moving around. This is wackadoodle to me to think about, but because of the movement of electrons, all atoms are constantly moving. So weird. But since the electrons are zipping around, the atoms themselves are constantly vibrating. I know. So they vibrate against each other, they bounce off each other. And in liquid, the water molecules can get up really close to each other. And these hydrogen bonds are constantly being formed and broken. When water becomes ice, when it solidifies, then it separates into a grid so that there is one hydrogen bond between each hydrogen and oxygen in the water. And because of the way that works, you get these hexagonal groupings. Based on that hexagonal grouping, you can make a snowflake, which is why snowflakes are always six-pointed, because of the way that water molecules bond together in ice. How cool is that? The other cool thing is that water, when it is solid, is less dense than when it is water or liquid, which is why ice floats. Floating ice makes it possible for life to exist under the surface of frozen lakes and oceans, because the ice on the surface actually insulates the water under it from the colder air above it. So while the air above might be far below freezing, the water below is going to be just about at frozen temperature. But organisms that have adapted to those temperatures can survive. And so lots of animals, algae, protists can live under the frozen surface of lakes and oceans while the water is frozen, because the ice floats on top. If ice were more dense, it would sink to the bottom. But ice is less dense than liquid water, so it floats on the surface. How cool is that? Okay, the other cool thing about water is that water is the most powerful solvent on Earth. Now, a solvent is what you call a liquid that you dissolve something in. So when you dissolve something in a liquid, you make a solution. The liquid is the solvent, the dissolved substance is the solute. If water is the solvent, you call it an aqueous solution. Aqueous for aqua, meaning water. So aqueous solution is a solution based on water. Most of the solutions that we enjoy in our life are aqueous solutions. Tree sap, which gets the tree sap of certain trees, of maple trees, gets made into syrup. Orange juice, Coca-Cola, beer, urine, all aqueous solutions. So remember, sometimes alcohol is the solution. I didn't make that up. That's somebody else's joke. When you dissolve an ionic solid in water? Remember that the polar water molecules are going to be very, very attracted to the ions. The positive hydrogen end of the water molecule is going to be attracted to the chloride. The negative oxygen is going to be attracted to the sodium. And so the two ions dissociate. That's what happens when a solid dissolves. The two ions actually separate, but they keep the electrons that they got in the ionic bond. So we end up with stable ions distributed amongst water molecules. That's what happens when you dissolve something in water. All right, so coming up next, we'll talk about one other cool thing that happens in water, and that's the formation of acids and bases. All right, so we've got hydrogen bonds, or the weak bonds between water molecules, based on the fact that water molecules have a negative and a positive pole. They are polar.